All right. Well, let me do something. I'm going to do this symbolically. I don't know if I'm going to keep doing this or not, but I thought as I was driving in, we have been talking so much about retasking the association. We spent the whole last year just kind of casting the vision and talking about it, that this year it's all about, okay, now let's stop talking and let's get down to work. And so this is not about trying to be cool. This is about saying symbolically, okay, this is the year where now we want to get down to work. What I've said last year and what we voted on in the last associational meeting was that we want to retask the association to mobilize churches to take on lostness. That really is the new direction for us as an association. If you remember what I've said in the past, what I said was our city has grown dramatically. If you look at a chart, and I've shown you this, so it's new data, that's why I'm not showing it to you now. If you look at a chart for the growth of Houston, it is just straight up. We're growing at an aggregate gain, about a net gain of 100,000 people per year. That's about 10,000, or excuse me, that's about 1 million per 10 years. We're growing at a rapid rate. We're not only growing fast, we're diversifying significantly. We become more and more diverse every day as a city. Do you know what the most diverse, ethnically, culturally, linguistically, diverse country in the world is? It is right here. The United States is the most ethnically and culturally and linguistically diverse country in the world. And Houston is one of the most ethnically and culturally diverse cities in the United States. What kind of job have we been doing of reaching this growing, diverse city? Well, if you remember last time I said, while the city's growing like this, our baptisms the last 10 years have stayed about like that. So even with 110 more churches than we had this time 10 years ago, we're still baptizing the same number of folks, which means the gap between the population and the number of folks we're reaching gets wider every day. So we've said we need to mobilize churches to take on lostness. And the immediate thought is, well, we just need to amp up what we've been doing. We've got to try harder to do what we know how to do. I mean, what church doesn't believe in the Great Commission? What church isn't trying to reach folks for Christ? So let's just try harder to do what we're doing, right? That's what most folks would say we need to do. What I said to you this time last year was, that's not going to work. That if you keep thinking the way you've been thinking, you'll keep doing what you've been doing. And if we keep doing what we've been doing, then we're going to get further and further behind every year. So this time last year, I said we need to learn how to think differently. And for those of you that were here, you may remember I talked about that. If you weren't here and you want to see the presentation, it's on our website. But what I tried to say was, the way we think in predictable ways. For example, fill in the blank, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. Right. Let's do it again for those of you that weren't with me yet. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. Why? It fits a pattern. Absolutely. And that's the way we think. We think in predictable patterns. In fact, if I say 10, 20, 30, 40, you immediately think 50. If I say something like 5, 8, 120, you wonder what's wrong because that just doesn't feel right. It doesn't fit. Exactly. Well, that's the trouble with our thinking. Once we get locked into a certain way of thinking, it's hard for us to think outside of that pattern. And the truth is, we have been doing things in Baptist churches the same way for so long, it is hard for us to think differently. But Thomas Kuhn, in his study of scientific revolutions, said this: every significant breakthrough is first a break with an old way of thinking. Every significant breakthrough is first a break with an old way of thinking. The trouble is, it's just hard for us to do that. So, last year I talked about thinking differently. And what I said was, my father drilled into me over and over again, think, son, think. But nobody told me how to think differently. And so I've spent, hundreds of hours this past year studying innovation, creativity, and trying to figure out what's it going to take for us as an association to think differently and to do differently in order to mobilize churches to take on lostness, so that we don't just try harder to do the same old thing. And I'll tell you, all across the convention, folks are saying we've got to reach the lost. But every time I hear folks talk about how we need to do it, they're talking about, let's go back and do the same thing we did in the 50s and 60s. Let's have block parties. Let's go door to door with evangelism. Let's do all the stuff we used to do that worked so well, without realizing this is a different world than it was in 1950 and 1960 here. So, where do creative ideas come from? That's the first thing I began to explore. And let me tell you what I thought for the longest time. I thought I was not creative. And the reason is I suffered under what I call the myth of epiphany. I thought that really creative ideas just kind of came as a blinding light, a flash of insight, like Jesus speaking to Paul on the road to Damascus. That's how really creative ideas come. That's what I thought. And we've got all the story that just kind of reinforces that. So Newton is sitting under an apple tree, and an apple falls down and hits him on the head, and he goes, "Oh, gravity, of course." Or Archimedes decides he really needs to take a bath, so he sits in a tub of water, and the water rises, and he goes, "Oh, eureka," and he comes up with this idea about how to weigh gold. We've got all this myth of epiphany that really creative ideas just come, and then I've also thought they only came to special people. You know, I'm pretty, I don't know, right brain, left brain, whatever it is, my brain is not the really creative brain. So I thought I just didn't have it. So I had to figure out, where do creative ideas come from? One of the most creative and entrepreneurial people of the 20th century was a guy by the name of Steve Jobs. 2001. You recognize this? What is this? It's an iPod. It's not the first generation. The first generation iPod was not in color. It was black and white. But this was the iPod, 2001. And it revolutionized a whole industry around music. The iPod allowed you to put music digitally on this little bitty thing, and then plug in your earphones, and wherever you went, you could hear music of your own choosing. And you not only could listen to music of your own choosing, you could make your own playlist. So you didn't have to listen all the way through an album. Remember, the old tape recorder beforehand? If you didn't like that song, you'd try and fast forward, but you never got it quite right. So now, man, you can do it your own way. It was absolutely fantastic. But where did he get the idea for that? Well, you remember this? The Walkman, the Sony Walkman. It was the first portable entertainment system.